Dr. Adams is a professor in the School of Information at Florida State University. He also works very closely with doctoral students in the instructional system and learning technologies, serving on a number of our student committees. He has been an instructional designer and has owned his own businesses. As an instructional designer, he works with interactive software, and he is a usability expert. He's a PMI certified project management professional and holds a doctoral degree in educational technologies from Boston University. He has led production teams with budgets ranging from $20,000 up to millions of dollars, spanning over 150 projects. In 2015, Dr. Adams was a Fulbright, spending 6 months in Thailand, where he worked with several universities developing information communication technology, entrepreneurship courses, and startup events. He is organized a startup weekend in Tallahassee, and so he's very interested in entrepreneurship and the use of emerging technologies. Finally, Dr. Adams is a friend of mine, and he is also his better half. Anjali, many of you know, has a master's degree from our program. So we frequently see Dr. Adams at our parties hanging on. He's one of those people that likes to show up for a good party. So I welcome you, Dr. Adams. It's all yours, sir.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction. It sounds like I've done a lot, but the fact of the matter is I've just been here a very long time. Today, though, I'd like to talk a little bit about usability. I've been a professor here at Florida State since 2001. So really, I have been here for a long time. And I started out teaching communication, but ended up in the IT department, mainly because of my interests. Historically, when I first came here, yes, I had just closed a business that I'd been running for 10 years, and that was Pilot Media. I designed and developed interactive software, and mostly for education, but also for entertainment. I did a lot of game programming. And part of that, I got really good at interaction design, mostly because I looked at a lot of other people's stuff and I stole a lot of really good ideas. It wasn't that easy, though, because it's not just a matter of taking an idea. You have to adopt it and change it to the content and learn how to program it yourself. So I did a lot of that work. Since then, I've in the last 5 years, I've changed or developed a new area of interest, which is artificial intelligence. And because of my background in design, I naturally went for computer vision. And if you have questions about that, you can ask me later. I'll talk about that after the presentation. All right, usability. What I want to talk about today is a minimal viable process. In other words, what do you need to actually do usability testing? And it's not, it's just like this original poster I have here, right? The fact of the matter is, if you start a project and you don't have the right tools, if you didn't plan properly, if you didn't collect the right documentation, get set up, it could end up like this for you. It could end up very sad and you wishing like, oh, it could have been different. I've been on projects like this. And it's what many people describe as technical debt. That is to say, as you work on a project, you put work into it, and that work is usually paid, and so you have to spend money, and you build up a certain amount of expenditures for a product. The work that you put into that product is the debt. If you have to go back and change the product at the end, that means changing a lot of things. So people describe that as a technical debt that's very heavy. And you want to avoid that. You do that by planning. Believe it or not, planning does it. The area of interaction design, when I worked full-time, when I owned my own company, I worked in this area full-time. It was fascinating. I really did meet people from practically every one of these disciplines. The gaming companies, Hasbro, I worked for Hasbro. and a couple other smaller gaming companies. And believe it or not, most of the people that work at gaming companies are industrial engineers. They're specialists in ergonomics. But I've worked with typographers, engineers, graphic designers, computer scientists, managers. It's just a fascinating field because it takes a lot of contributions from different disciplines to make it happen. All right. So back to the point of my talk today. When does it happen? Well, actually, usability really happens throughout the course, the life of a project.
Hey, Jonathan, this is Jim. Were you sharing your screen? Because I don't see the Liechtenstein anymore.
Uh-oh. Let's try that again.
I can see the slides.
I saw them too.
Great,
Do you
there
have them now?
Yes.
Okay. Everybody has them then. Okay. Perfect. So it goes throughout the life cycle of the project. In the beginning, you try to anticipate what your users are going to do, what they want. When you're doing the production work, when you're actually creating the product, that's when you get to meet the users personally and you ask them, how am I doing? What's going on? And then at the end, you evaluate, you collect data. As, for example, search engine optimization, you use Google Analytics and you collect data. And from each one of these phases, you infer something about your users and you can learn from what they're doing. At least that's the theory of usability. Okay. So the before part. Sometimes things don't go well. And usually I used to have a teacher, and that teacher used to tell the class all the time, it's very important to take your fingers out of your ears and put them in your mouth when you're talking with someone. And I think his point was the tendency of most people is to tell you what the users want. I ran into this frequently. I'd pick up a contract with a company and I'd say, tell me about your users. And they'd say, well, our users do this and our users do that, and da da da. And they give me some sort of description about who their users were. And I only on a few projects, out of all those projects, did I really get to meet the users and interview them or set up tests or scenarios for them to engage and then try to learn about how they were using the software. Miscommunication is frequent. One tool that you really need is some sort of project plan. I use a 2-pager to get started. Project plans are internal documents. You keep them inside the team, you give them to everybody on the team, and you say, is this really going to happen this way? Frequently, you don't know when you're working on a team, you don't know intimately what every other person on the team is doing. You know what the goal is, but oftentimes it's not possible to know how each person is performing their job. And so you share this document so that they can provide feedback on what they're going to be doing and will let you know whether or not this plan is realistic. I use a 2-pager, very simple. I list the goals. What's the goal of the project? I list the deliverables. I list the deliverables that I'm going to give to the client, right? I always do that. Scope definition. There's tricks to this, but you have to describe in excruciating detail how many screens, how much content, how many hours. You have to lay all this stuff out. If you don't, it's not a project. All projects have a beginning and they have an end. If you take on a job and you don't describe an end, the client will not give you one. You'll be working forever. I used to call that the forever and ever clause. Scope definition prevents that. You say, this is exactly what I'm going to produce, and when I'm done, you pay me. And everybody gets the chance to debate what's on this document, the client and you and everybody in the team. The milestones are very important because that tells everybody, like, I'm going to be on the prototype on March 15th. And if you don't make that date, you can begin to look around and say, I think we need to change how we're doing business with, one of your subcontractors, whatever. Anyway, the plan's important. You need to have in that plan some kind of navigation scheme so people can understand how they get around. Some are more complicated than others. I used to function exclusively off of a hierarchical design for a flowchart. This is a real product. Flowcharts are great because if you want to take a shortcut on scope definition, this is how you do it. You give the client a flowchart, and every box on the flowchart represents one screen. And you don't do any more and you don't do any less. That's your scope definition. Some years ago, I did a presentation for ISLT, and I talked a little bit about practical design. This is another thing that you can do when you're getting ready for usability, to produce a project that's going to be usable. That's another way of saying it. But that's learning the rules about good design. It's obviously you want your clients, the people you're designing instruction for, to have an easy time of it. And if you learn these rules and you follow them, you're less likely to put up roadblocks or introduce effects that will somehow deter from the real purpose of what you're trying to do, which is teach or learn. If you do follow the rules, you don't even have to be a great designer. You can produce beautiful looking websites or screens, instruction basically. If there's nothing to get in the user's way, they can find the content they need and get to it without any problem. This usually results from being prepared with an idea that your screens will be laid out on some kind of grid. Put things in a grid, they're going to look, can't help yourself. It's going to look neat. Oftentimes people don't do this. And there's one book written by Steve Krug. It's called Don't Make Me Think. He and I have the same idea about structure. Not the structure of a building, but the structure of a screen as you look at it. And what we're looking at here on the left-hand side is the deep structure, the backbone, the skeleton, the framework upon which the content is hung. And that backbone defines the regions of the screen. And you can see the backbone on the left and the resulting content on the right. And again, this is clearly a 3-column design. And once you've got the hang of using grids and you can lay out something neatly, you're most of the way there, the destination being a usable experience. The other thing you can do once you've got the backbone, the deep structure laid out, you want to talk about or begin to think about how you're going to use the surface, the skin, the part that the user looks at and experiences when they're in the website or working with your software. And that you can really help a person by being aware of what balance is. Not using too much text, not using too much graphics, or being aware that those two can be used in harmony, not necessarily evenly balanced all the time. Sometimes you want your graphics larger and other times you want your text larger. But having practice with this kind of thinking is invaluable. And once you learn the rules, you can then begin to learn how to break the rules without introducing any kind of bizarre pathways or distractions that will affect the user, right? This is from the National Park Service. I'm a big fan. The designs are amazing. As contrasted to something like this. Now, clearly, there's a difference. And the difference is one person had a plan, hello, and another person had a plan 5 minutes before they sat down to make the website. In other words, they didn't. And this kind of thing is not uncommon. The use of incompatible color schemes or irregular shaped regions, content regions, things that don't seem to make any sense. These are all things that make you stop and think, like, why did they do it like that? Or even this white text on a light gray background. That's going to be very difficult to read. So that's going to stop you and make you think. And that's the whole idea behind usability. Is the design part is not tricky, and you don't want to make it tricky. It should thrive on its own simplicity. All right. The other thing you can do, getting ready to make your usable software, is think about who is going to be using it. So anticipating the things that people will do wrong, there's a whole science behind that. There's a book written by Donald Norman called The Design of Everyday Things. And in that book, he goes into detail about the different kinds of errors that we know people make naturally. Basically, cognitive misunderstandings. I think that's one way of putting it. And so here's an example. Can anybody tell me what I'm looking at here?
Is it a road?
It's a road. What's unusual about this road?
The wording is, it's very odd. It's at the bottom, it's in the middle, but it's flipped. Yeah.
Okay, all right, good job. You're approaching this like a designer. The text isn't regularized, and it's not spaced well. But the fact of the matter is, this is a road and it's labeled. Isn't that unusual?
Is it a crosswalk?
Well, yeah, it's a crosswalk. So why is it labeled look right and look?
In the UK, and it's
the UK.
Expect, yeah.
And so
For foreigners.
this is a thing that you can know that people do, that you can anticipate, that can help you be a better usability designer. People get habituated really quick. In fact, there's some research around, right? Especially over the last 4 years. But repeated messaging, if you say something to a person several times, 3, 4 times, that will actually introduce a certain level of bias. Yeah, advertisers and marketers know this. And people over time become habituated to think a certain way because of these biases. In the United States of America, I know all of you know it, stop, look, and listen. And we got habituated into stop, looking, and listening when we were in elementary school. And we were always told to look to our left, right? Soldiers. And then we go to England or Thailand or Australia. And we dutifully look to the left and get crushed by a bus coming from the right-hand side. It's just a habit. Just a habit. And people do this. Something to be aware of when you're designing. Oh, wait, that's not the screen I want. Hang on, here we go. Okay, so let's try this one. Which is the correct penny? Oh.
They're all so similar.
No, they're not.
A? I don't know.
A looks
Okay.
good.
Here's another weird thing about the way people are. Maybe not so much over the last year during the pandemic, but before that, we all handled coins every single day. And you want to know what? We could probably reach into our pocket or purse and pull out a penny without even knowing what it looks like, right? We've set it up that way. Some coins even have ridges on the edges. Which ones?
Quarters?
Quarters and
Dimes.
Dimes. That's so you don't mix the dimes up for pennies and the quarters up for nickels. We're putting information into the environment. This is the point. People get habituated into doing things in certain ways. And it gets to the point where you can do things without even looking. That's also your worst enemy. And being habituated and doing things automatically. Here's another example of putting information in the environment. Had I asked all of you where the letters start and the sequence of letters for each number, you might not have gotten it right. And by the way, what's the worst thing in the world a company can do? Give you a number like dial 9, dial me. So what happens when a company gives you a word to dial instead of a number? It doesn't take 5 seconds like a number would. It takes 5 minutes. You have to look up what each number is. And then when you've actually finished dialing, you can't remember the number because you haven't addressed the number in that way. Usability issues all over the place on this one. So we know that there are certain things about people that we can anticipate, right? Then there are things that we can always sort of guess about, right? Like we know ourselves in our own hearts if we're the red person, the red pill person, or the blue pill, right? We know in our own hearts, but maybe not everybody would know. We also characterize people in certain roles, right? I'm a Mac, I'm a PC. And not only do we do this to help us understand the world, we label things in the world in this way to help us deal with it. We also attach a lot of meanings to these labels, right? So we attach the idea that a person who likes a Mac is really cool and funky and they like, crazy art, whereas a person operating a PC is just like plaid shirts and business suits. All right, so we characterize people in a certain way, but we know that, and we can find out all kinds of information about people, about groups of people, I should say. And then the point of doing that research, of learning about who your audience is before you actually meet them, is to do exactly this, is to build what's called a persona. And these are really something that many people don't spend enough time thinking about, let alone doing. In sales, I used to do what's called a 30-second prep. Before any sales meeting I would have, or any client meeting, I would make sure that I knew who I was meeting with. I'd try to learn about the person, where they've been, what kind of role they played. And then just before the meeting, I'd take out my notebook and I'd give 30 seconds. Okay, I'm meeting with Jill Anderson, and she's, okay, yeah, I remember Jill, sure, I remember last time I met with her. And I'll do that. And that's enough. That's enough to make the meeting go better. And that should be enough for all of you to think like, wow, if I spend 30 seconds just prepping up on a person, I could deal with them more effectively. What if I spent 30 minutes or even 3 hours, like doing some serious research and building this characterization of who my audience is? I'd be able to talk to them a lot more effectively. Not enough people do this. And when you build a persona, the idea is to think about, what does this person value? Because this is one of the features that affects usability. Sometimes you'll hear people say, I felt like the designers were talking to me. Well, maybe they were. They had spent a lot of time developing a persona, and they really were talking to someone like you. And so value can be viewed in a lot of different ways. This formula is sort of the technical way that economists like to assign value to something: the quality, the service, the cost. But actually people value things financially, cosmetically, location. There are personal values about whether you're a tree hugger or you're not. You like chess or volleyball. I don't know, but everybody has some personal qualities. This becomes important usability because we tend to treat groups of people as audiences and believe that audiences have a bell curve. There's a certain critical mass of habits or behaviors, commonalities in that audience to steer our way of thinking about how we should talk to them. This tool is great. I love this tool because if you build a persona and then you spend a little bit extra time trying to figure out what is really important to this person and what do they want out of this software, what do they want out of this experience. This really is the steroids of this part of the exercise, getting to know your users. And especially getting to know their core values. Yeah. Okay. And so in order to address a lot of these things, the answer from a lot of designers is it's pretty standard. And all of you being in an instructional design program or associated with a program somehow know that aids, design aids, job aids, they're just invaluable and can help us find new ways of communicating or presenting topical information in a way that's easy to access and navigate. Two key things. See, so you have to understand your audience because you might not be putting this poster up in front of just anybody. Humor helps, but if you're going to use humor, make sure you know that your audience will appreciate it, right? All right, so let's just recap it. What do we do before we start production? We got to have a plan, a production plan. Should have some storyboards, some graphical representations of what the screens will look like, and a flow chart. And that's going to show not only scope, but it's going to show how many screens you need to fit that content. All right. And then you can begin to think about your users. You can anticipate their mistakes if you can. Think about where they're going to trip up most likely. Get some personas and find out what's valuable to your audience. This is a good start. This will help steer your thinking in terms of how to distribute the content, how content dense you want your screens, color, and layout. All right, so during production is when you really get down to it. This is when you meet your users, hopefully. I'm not going to go through this entire screen, but I know that this is being recorded, and this is a very helpful one-screen overview of the types of activities that are incorporated into usability testing. It's funny, Anjali was asking me this morning, like, I thought you were going to talk about usability. I said, well, testing is not separate from usability. In fact, you cannot find out if your software is usable unless you ask, right? And you do that in a structured way, all right? I've worked with a number of different people on usability assessment, and it's not unusual for some misunderstandings to develop. Oftentimes, people don't understand that usability testing is qualitative. So your only cause and effect that you really want to know is how it affects the feelings of your users. And of course, whether or not they can accomplish the goal that's the goals that are set forth in the content. So asking the users and then recording their feedback is the coin of the realm. This can be done with a number of techniques. It's possible to collect data real time with the user in the room, face to face, in other words. And that requires you building some paper prototypes. I always recommend, I've always used and would never vary to using digital usability materials. I personally use low fidelity hand-drawn storyboards. And I do that for a reason. A lesson hard learned, I should say. I worked on a project once and presented storyboards that were done by my graphic designer. And instead of having a conversation about the distribution of content and navigation and waypoints and interaction design, we spent the entire 40 minutes talking about the way it looked. That was really bad. I learned a very important lesson that day: never use finished graphics for usability testing or design documents. They'll distract from the real purpose of the conversation. But when you're doing usability testing, this is what you do. You do hand-drawn documents that resemble a screen, and you make little piece parts, widgets, that you can move on and off the screen background that's in front of the user. So you have different roles. You would have a moderator and a helper. The helper would move the pieces that represent screen changes and widgets and so forth, drop-down menus, for example. The helper would move those on and off the screen for the user, and the user would talk out loud. And so that is essentially how a face-to-face usability test runs. You can do them online. You can present materials online and have people work through different scenarios, or you can do an uncontrolled online test. And those are just recorded, essentially. I put this screen up because I did have a usability test one time. This is a funny story. A gentleman asked me, he was developing a new product, and asked me to run a usability test on his new product. It was an online tool. And I said, sure. And it was designed to be a software as a service, which means that it's an online tool and anybody can log in and use it from anywhere. I said, sure. And when he came, I had a group of people, about 15 people, and we were going to do a controlled focus group. So we're going to show different screens and different screen sequences, and then get feedback from the 15 people in the room. The owner of the company came with the lead software engineer. Oh, this was bad. So we showed the screen, and the participants in the usability study were saying, oh, I think that text is a little bit too small, and maybe it's too far apart from the other text. And here's what the software engineer did. Well, it's like that because that was the whole conversation. So that's why I have the screen up here. The users were saying, okay, Ginger, I've had it. That screen can't be like that. Oh, and they're talking to the software developer, and all the software developer heard was blah, 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 blah. And he wasn't going to change anything, wasn't going to change his mind. So the point is that even when you run usability tests, the way in which you conduct them is important. Number one, I think I would never have the software engineer in the room again during usability tests, because it turned into a debate. And really what we were trying to do is collect data, not talk about the data, just collect it, and we would analyze it later. And the second thing is that in the presentation of data, the interpretation of why people are not performing as expected, it's very hard to present that information when you're doing it real time. So that was just a lesson learned. Usability is a common courtesy. Basically, people don't want to be told what to do. They want to feel like the site was designed for them. And bare minimum that they can navigate, the end user will be able to navigate smoothly without getting lost, without any dead ends, with breadcrumbs. So this is from a book by Steve Krug, and his whole philosophy is that you shouldn't make people think. And if you distill the screen down, basically there's the overriding philosophy is just to keep things very simple. Again, the only way to find out if your software is usable is to ask. And when you ask, listen. It's key. I hear this, I've heard this so many times from clients. You know, I was in business, so I would write the software. And then I would say, are you interested in doing a usability test to make sure, just to confirm our design? And it always sounded like a good idea until they found out it cost money. And then people don't understand the value of usability testing. So they, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, people will say, well, you know, I know my users. We don't really need to do this. I understand my audience. It's also helpful to know, I'm going to wrap up in a minute, but it's also very helpful to understand where users will have issues. And this is from a book by Donald Norman. And his idea was that there are two places where a person is going to most likely have a usability problem. And that is when they're in the middle of a sequence of actions, they complete a series of actions, and then something happens, but not the way they expected. All right, so they start with a goal, and going down the left-hand side, they have an intention to act. They're gonna like start an exercise, and they start the sequence of actions, and then something happens where they have to get lost, or a screen doesn't, something fails. All right, and they're waiting for feedback from the system, and what they get is a fail. So that's one place. The other place is the person goes through that, they complete the series of steps, all right? They get their feedback, and they get feedback, and then they're not sure what the feedback means. All right, and so these are the two areas where you're going to run into problems. And that sounds really, I know that sounds kind of a little bit esoteric, not much there to latch on to, but honestly, when there's a mismatch between what a person wants to do and the result, confusion. And it's the same thing with evaluation. If it takes too much effort to get to where you need to go, it's likely because you're not getting the kind of feedback you need. And it's just going to slow you down and create a problem. And again, so this is an example of a low fidelity prototype. This is the kind of stuff I use for paper prototyping. All right, and I just want to show you kind of what it looks like, paper prototyping. Paper prototyping, really, it can be done very quickly. You need a kit. You need a pair of little scissors you use in elementary school, some crayons, some Scotch tape, some Post-it notes, some construction paper or blank pages, and just, you know, some pens and pencils, of course, erasers. But just with those, a kit, I used to actually have a kit, a Ziploc bag with those materials in it, and that was my usability testing kit. That's all you need. You can draft a usability prototype really quick. It takes 3 to 4 people. That's it. The idea is that, or the prevailing belief is all you need is 6 people to do a usability test. And this would be a paper prototype. This is what it looks like. You can see on under the left hand of this gentleman are the different screens in the sequence, and the Post-it notes have different, I guess, ideas or problems you're trying to work through. And usability can happen on a whiteboard too. I mean, it can happen anywhere. And you can see that what they've got on the whiteboard is a very large duplicate of what they would expect to see on their cell phone. Okay, so just to wrap up, all the central tools for paper prototyping, we have the project plan, storyboards, flowchart. Spend some time anticipating our audience by developing a persona and a value model. And then for testing, we have a plan. We need our storyboards and some tasks for the user to do. Some strategies, in other words, paper prototyping or the whiteboard. We need some people, never more than 6, and you need a consent form. Those tools, you should be able to conduct a really effective strategy to develop software that would just be phenomenal, very usable. Any questions?
So this is a time for you to ask questions or to provide your own ideas about usability and what perhaps some of the strategies you have used in your own testing of software.
Well, that's a great question. I have found most of the time that the times when I've been able to focus on usability was when the client was in the entertainment business. Content training, educational products, things like that, wasn't in the budget typically. So, from that perspective, I figured at one point that the best way to handle usability is to try to get out in front of it. If you can't do that, then you're left with the trailing edge, if you follow me. The trailing edge being trend analysis. So you can use tools like Google Analytics. You can find data all over the place these days because this is the coin of the realm. So there should be a sufficient supply of data around for you about just about anything you want to know. And so my take on it is to, again, the most important thing is to get out in front of the design. I always tell people who want to learn how to be a programmer, the most important thing to do is to focus on the visual design first. Yeah. Do any of you have questions?
I have one. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So earlier you were talking about creating personas. And if I understood correctly, that's for the clients, right? As opposed to the who you're designing. Well, I guess if you're designing for the clients, that's true. But then if there's another audience, do you design personas for like the, if there's a college student or a classroom or, yeah, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, having dealt with my undergraduates for so many years, I think I could probably develop a persona off the top of my head, that group. But oftentimes, so for example, I developed some training materials for a company called ABioCore. They make an artificial heart and stents. I know nothing about stents, nothing. And I don't know who does, to tell you the truth. We had to spend some time interviewing our client, the owners of the company that makes the stents. We had to interview them to find out who they were talking to, who that training material was for, and what they were like, and their educational values, and the whole nine. But I do also use personas for important meetings of any kind. Yeah.
And I was just curious because you answered it a little bit there, but I was curious how you built the personas. So maybe interviewing, but did you actually because something I'd probably do was, now that you've mentioned this, I never thought of it before, was, let me just do some background research. Being a librarian, that's my thing. But just curious how you gathered the how you built the persona, if it was more face-to-face interactions, online, a combination of materials.
Okay, so one year I did training at the Boston Museum of Science, but they also knew I had a software company. So we developed some software for them, and it was for a national science fair contest day. Like kids from all these science museums logged into our software, and they had sort of like a Jeopardy test experience. It was a national contest. It's funny. It was just hysterical. So we wanted to find out or learn more about who that audience was. So, all right, national science contests. Let's find out about those, you know. So we went off and tried to research about different science contests. Incidental information you learn about who the kids were that won one year and how smart they were. It's like being a detective almost. But I found that to be very helpful because then we were able to figure out how to design this. The graphic designer had a great sense of how far apart to put everything on the screen and how much content on the screen would be appropriate and the color scheme. It's
Thank you. No, that was
Yeah.
I was just curious. That's helpful. Thank you.
Jonathan, there's
LinkedIn
a
works too. Yeah, go ahead.
John,
Sorry.
there's a question in the chat that says, do you create positive and negative personas in the sense that negative persona would be the harder to reach or the person that might not adopt or adapt the product? So have you thought about the notion of positive and negative personas?
That's a great question. And so there are different ways to approach that. As I've mentioned, we also personified our clients. And we tended to personify our clients as either being a control style client, relationship, attention, or detail style. And so I don't know, I think those different styles of personalities affect different people differently. I personally like relationship style people, but detail style people can make me a little crazy sometimes. Whereas other people have other preferences, you know? And so I don't know if I've ever really a negative persona. But I have put things in personas like this client may want to have more detail about the process we're using to create X, Y, and Z than other clients, you know, be ready for that. So,
I would say as your friend, yes, I would agree. You probably don't like detail people very much. What do you think, Demetrius? Are there other questions for Dr. Adams?
Just to follow up on the personas, is this is for internal use, right? I mean, no one else besides those who are in the designing are seeing it, or I'm assuming we don't share this with the clients or anything like that, unless they want to see their, well, then, yeah, I don't know.
well, like I think okay, so let's consider a persona strictly for the audience, the students.
True.
So in that case, I mean, we would show those to the client, the people paying us to produce the instructional materials. We would show it. You know, we got this right. Would you say this is your audience? You know, because I mean, and that was very useful for me because honestly, most of the time when I started asking about who's your audience, what are your clients like, I would get brushed. I would get like, oh, we know our clients. Don't worry about it. But no, I want the details.
That makes sense. But the clients, you wouldn't show the clients their personas, technically.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Oh no.
Just making sure.
So we had a sales team and a marketing team in my company. Myself and the sales and marketing team, we all talked about our clients. And you have to, if I may just talk briefly about expectations. managing expectations is the most important thing you can learn how to do. And if you're going to manage expectations, you have to know what people expect. If you want to know what people expect, you have to understand who they are. Otherwise. And so we talked about managing people's expectations all the time. A detail style person, no, I don't like dealing with them because they make me work. I have to fill out extra forms, provide extra information for those people. Relationship style people call me up. Hey, how's it going, Jonathan? Oh, awesome. Great. Talk to you next week. Fine. Love it. So the idea that we would show that to people, no, we never did that. But we certainly knew who our clients were, and we did everything we could to maintain those relationships in the best possible way. And that's what the personas did for us. Even if it had information in there that was not entirely favorable. Like we think this person's detail style, you know, we wouldn't share that.
And I think Kathy Tenza adds an important thing in the chat is if you really want to know what learners think, go to the learners, because clients don't always know what learners want and need.
Yeah, and like I agree with that 100%. And my experience has been the clients will prefer to tell you what they think their clients, who they think their clients are. They don't like it when you try to find out for yourself.
Are there other questions
Megan?
for Jonathan?
I'm sorry. Could you unmute? You're muted though, Megan. Hold on.
Oh,
there you go.
okay. Two questions. One was about the personas. A lot of what you look like you had on display for the Jill Taylor persona was kind of market research based, and you even had information about an archetype. In this particular example, is that something that you've surveyed your customer for that information, or do you have typical resources you would consult?
Well, I think that would depend operationally how you're receiving clients. We received clients who we were a business to business operation. And so our clients had the audience, it was their audience, and they didn't have the internal skills to produce software like we did. So they would hire us externally. In that model, we relied on them for the information about their audiences mostly. But that doesn't stop us from like going online and go like, oh, that's a software company and they sell CAD/CAM software. I wonder what CAD/CAM people are like. That doesn't stop you from being curious, you know. It's just that clients are funny about that stuff. They don't want to. I think part of it is client, you know, it's their audience. They spend a lot of money developing that audience and they want to hang on to it. So a lot of clients, they just want to keep it that way.
Well, my second question was, I saw a lot of what I suspect were Microsoft kind of tools that you are using in your planning process. Is there anything else that you'd like to highlight for us?
Well, to be honest with you, I haven't done a serious project plan in quite some time. Since I used to use Microsoft tools to develop the plans. However, nowadays you've got things like Salesforce and online tools that are, and not only that, but the world has really changed. When I was a developer, we were using the PMP process, the Project Management Institute process. Nowadays, because software is taking up so much of the production bandwidth, that Agile and has sort of taken the forefront in project management philosophy.
I haven't found a lot of products that are compatible with an Agile approach because they require, you know, we work with a lot of people who are still thinking in Gantt charts, which isn't compatible in that sense. So if anyone else has suggestions for that, if you could throw them in the chat, I'd love to hear about anyone else's ideas. But thank you, Dr. Adams.
You're welcome.
Well, folks, we've reached the time to say thank you to Dr. Adams and to tell you what's going to be happening in the next few weeks. So Nicole Alvarello, wave Nicole, say hi, Nicole. Hi, Nicole. Nicole will be making a presentation on, I believe it is March 12th. Is that right, Demetrius? I went to the wrong month. I got to go to the next month.
That is correct, March 12th at 1:30.
Yep, March 12th. And Nicole will be discussing a project that she's worked on before on redesigning a curriculum from a PDF to a fully interactive instructional program. Nicole, you want to say anything at all about that before I botch what you're going to talk about?
Sure, yeah. I'll be taking you through a redesign I did for adaptive learning, really going through what we did for those adaptive learning technologies and the process that I used.
And Nicole works for Atrium Health, which is a very large healthcare company in North Carolina. In addition, on April 2nd, we're going to have our tribute to Dr. Roger Kaufman, and Demetrius will be sending out some information soon. I know he's going to put something in the chat now. Demetrius, you want to go ahead and talk about the registration, Nicole?
Yes, Nicole's presentation is March 11th, which is only a couple of weeks away. We normally have 4 weeks in between presentations. So because of the quick turnaround time, I am now going to drop the registration link in the chat box, and you can actually start registering right now.
And again, it's March 12th, everybody, not
March
the
12th.
11th, the 12th, right?
March 12th.
And it's right, March 12th at 1:30 p.m. And so we'll be sending out information. I think the communications office is hoping to do that by Monday, but you can start registering now. And then on April 2nd, we're going to have the tribute to Roger Kaufman. It will begin at 1:30, but it will go a little longer. So if you don't mind, put in 1:30 to 3:30 in your calendar. I do not think it's going to go 2 hours, but we currently have 4 people who will be talking about the impact of Roger Kaufman on their own work. We also are going to open it up for anybody that would like to say anything at all about their impact of Roger's work or ideas on them. We're hoping that Mrs. Kaufman and Jack, their son, join us. We don't yet have commitment. So we're hoping to make this a very nice event for the Kaufmans. And so that again is on April 2nd at 1:30. Other than that, I see that we have 1 minute left, and I'd just like to.
I have another
Yes,
quick
please.
announcement, Dr. Klein.
Yes.
If you guys aren't aware, we do record these sessions and we upload them to the FSU ISLT YouTube channel. Sometimes those links are embedded in the announcements, but I have put the link directly to the channel in the chat box. So Dr. Adams' video should be uploaded sometime early next week. But right now, our previous presentations are already uploaded to the channel already.
Thanks, Demetrius. So
Thanks,
is there
everyone.
anything for the good of the order? Anybody want to spring up? Well, thanks again, Jonathan. I appreciate it. And Demetrius, it's always a pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
All right.